Tennis establishment's plan to cancel the real GOAT and anoint a fake one failed miserably when Nadal went out of the US Open with the whimper in the 4th round. Last year, when Djokovic declared that he wants to end the monopoly in tennis, the tennis monopoly decided to end him instead, and to hand the title of the greatest ever to anybody but Novak. To execute their plan, they needed to pull off two things: stop Djokovic from continuing to crush all records, and install a pretender of their own choosing to the throne. To stop Djokovic was simple. He refused the COVID injection, so they used that as an excuse to not let him play. And with Federer basically retired, their only choice for the new GOAT was Nadal. In 2022, the corrupt tennis leadership sabotaged Djokovic and other top players and gave Nadal license to lie, cheat and steal so that he can embellish his statistics and usurp the title of the greatest ever. Let's retrace Nadal's path through the dirtiest season in tennis history and review how, despite all the unfair advantages, he still failed miserably. The only reason why Nadal fans got so excited at the beginning of the year is that he won his asterisk in Australia. And make no mistake, if there was any doubt that Nadal's shameful win in Australia was an asterisk, his impotent performance in the US Open cleared all doubts. For months we have listened Nadal fans repeat the stupidest mantra that because Medvedev beat Djokovic in the US Open and Nadal beat Medvedev in Australia, somehow this meant that Nadal would have beaten Novak in Australian Open. Guys, if Nadal grew some balls and played Novak anywhere except in the French Open, not all the drugs in the world would save him from another spanking like in the 2019 Australian Open final. Probably even worse. If Francis Tiafoe can so easily beat Nadal, imagine what Novak would do to him. Nadal's season continued in Indian Wells, where he lost in the final against Fritz. But of course, only because he got injured. A fractured rib. But only 4 weeks later, he was already preparing for Rome. In Rome, he was losing to Shapovalov. And then he started hobbling. And just in case anyone missed it, Rafa made sure that everybody knew that he was hurt. Supposedly, his participation in the French Open was in doubt. But we all knew it was only an excuse to pump himself full of drugs. Only 10 days later, when Roland Garros started, he was miraculously fine again. And even more miraculously, he played the entire tournament on a numb foot.
It's a miracle!
He sprinted, sidestepped, slid, and jumped all over the place without feeling in his foot, yet never landed awkwardly or twisted his ankle. He was the healthiest man in the world throughout the entire French Open. So healthy that after playing 8 hours of tennis in 2 matches, he still practiced for 90 minutes after finishing the second match. That's right, after beating Felix Auger-Aliassime in 5 sets, then only 2 days later beating Djokovic in another 4-hour match, Nadal still had so much energy that he felt the need to practice for another hour and a half after the match with Novak. It's almost like he needed to get something out of his system. In any case, after physically overpowering 7 healthy opponents on the road to yet another French Open title, the eternally injured Nadal ended up on crutches. Here he is on June 8th on crutches, and here he is on June 13th, only 5 days later, practicing on grass. And his foot felt so good that the next day he even played golf. After many athletes and experts started to voice their skepticism about Nadal's injury and recovery patterns, all talk about his injuries suddenly stopped as he breezed through the first 4 matches in Wimbledon without any sign of physical problems. But as soon as he found himself losing against Fritz, he took a medical timeout, this time for an abdominal injury. The injury didn't stop him from making a heroic comeback against Fritz, but Rafa was conveniently too injured for an uncomfortable encounter with Kyrgios, not to mention Djokovic in the final. Isn't it such a shame for us fans that Rafa and Novak only play each other on clay? Because something always happens to Rafa whenever he is to face Novak on any other surface. Anyway, After Wimbledon, Rafa recovered just in time to play in Cincinnati. Nadal didn't play in Cincinnati in any of the previous 4 years. Why skip Montreal and play in Cincinnati this year? Maybe because 2 champions from the previous 4 seasons, Djokovic and Zverev, could not play this year, and the 3rd champion, Medvedev, has been in poor form ever since Australian Open. Nadal only won Cincinnati Masters once, all the way back in 2013, and he reached the quarterfinals only once in the last 9 years. This was his chance. That's why he played there. That's what the 2022 season was all about. For Nadal to win all the things that he couldn't for the last 10 years because Djokovic, Federer and other big-time players were in his way. He did not win the Australian Open for 13 years, and he would have retired without winning it again if Djokovic wasn't deported. He hasn't won Indian Wells or Cincinnati for 9 years. And this year, he went for both, because Djokovic wasn't allowed to play. And now he's trying to become number 1 again. Something that he could never do if the rankings were not such a complete mess, thanks in large part to his own political shenanigans through the Player Council. And who knows, he might even make one more desperate attempt to finally win the ATP Finals. But mark my words, not if Novak is there. Normally, a season with 2 slams must be considered a success. But if we put this Nadal season into context, it's a failure. It's a failure considering the high price that both Nadal and the tennis establishment paid. In trying to elevate Nadal to a place he doesn't deserve, the tennis establishment has exposed its own corruption. They banned world number 1 and number 2 players from Grand Slams, and in doing so they broke their own anti-discrimination rules. They unleashed an unprecedented character assassination campaign against their best player, and they destroyed their own ranking system. In the years to come, we may look back at this season as the beginning of the end for the ATP. Nadal, on the other hand, got so carried away in his eagerness to match Novak that his mask, which Nike and ATP created for him, fell off, and he showed his true face. He threw his biggest rival of 20 years to the wolves to avoid facing him on the court. He used his position in the Player Council not to help his rival in need, but to take away his ranking points so that he can try to be number 1 again, even if it meant screwing all other players. He took dirty tricks to never-before-seen levels. He exposed his love affair with needles, and he bullied his opponents without any fear of penalty because he knew he was untouchable. His arrogance, entitlement, and lack of sportsmanship were on full display. And what does Nadal have to show for all of this? Just another French Open and a big fat asterisk. In a year when the greatest hardcourt player of all times was banned from both hardcourt slams and all 4 hardcourt masters, Nadal won only 1 hardcourt title. In Wimbledon, Medvedev and Rublev were banned. Cilic and last year's finalist Berrettini couldn't play because they got COVID. Nadal didn't face any top 10 players and he still couldn't reach the final. And in the US Open, he didn't face any top 20 players and couldn't reach the quarterfinal. That's quite pathetic. Considering all the unfair advantages given to Nadal and outrageous injustices inflicted on Novak, Nadal's season is a miserable failure. With the full power of the tennis establishment behind him, Nadal couldn't do what Novak did with the full power of the tennis establishment against him. Nadal couldn't be the GOAT even if he tried. And he tried so very hard. Thank you for watching, and I will talk to you soon.